Let's move on then to Sandra Schoohoven, Head of Sustainability at a bank, at ING. And under her leadership, I think has been doing an awful lot on sustainability. It's nowadays ranked as one of the leaders among banks on sustainability by organizations like CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project. And was, I read, the first international bank to align its 600 billion euro lending portfolio with the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. So Sandra, I think, yeah, having heard from the investor perspective, it would be really interesting to hear from an actual bank who would be confronted in a very real way with an MPS. How you feel about that. And ING, of course, as I said, has been doing a lot on sustainability, and just a month ago you launched your first integrated climate report, which, if I understand correctly, integrated both the climate risk and the climate opportunity, the climate action potential into one report for the first time. Specifically, what did what actions were there in there that would make your mortgage portfolio more sustainable? And is an MPS part of the package?
Great, thanks. Great introduction, Sonia, and thanks a lot for having me here. Indeed, I work for ING. I think most of you will probably know us as a large bank in Europe. We serve millions of customers, around 39 million to be exact, and a portion of that is, of course, also homeowners benefiting from a mortgage. Not so many customers maybe, but it's a very large part of our balance sheet. It's almost half. So when we look at climate action, yes, we could look at fossil fuels, as was mentioned before, and that does create eyeballs. But if you look at the real impact on our balance sheet and real impact on the ground, that's actually through buildings. So absolutely a topic of big interest to us. And maybe because we already have an MPS in place, so we actually apply this voluntarily, maybe it would be good also to add a bit of concrete actions to this panel discussion on what does it mean, how does it look like, but also what kind of challenges do you then encounter, and how could we move this forward before we might consider to make this regulation, because then are you really shifting the needle? That's a bit of my question mark, but I'll come to that later. So maybe first on how do we do it? And we call all of this our Terra approach, and yes, you can read all about that in our integrated climate report, which is online, ing.com, so just download it and you can read on all these sectors that we have a portfolio standard on, but then also to our mortgage portfolio. So we launched it already in 2019. And back then we only were able to disclose the portfolio of the Netherlands and Germany when it comes to mortgages. And now we have also included Poland and Belgium. And now we're at 70% of our entire mortgage portfolio. So that already brings me to the first challenge. Why not 100%? And to be very honest, Belgium is only in the first state available. Because we just simply don't have the data. The data is not available to do that work in other countries. So we really, really need to speed up on accessibility of the data in order to be able to do that. So what do we measure? We look at our assets, so the houses that we finance, and we look at the CO2 intensity of those properties. So we measure the kilograms CO2 emitted per square meter of those houses. So what we need is a good estimate of what the CO2 emissions would be for that property. We use the energy labels as a proxy for that. And of course, we need the square meters for that property. And then we can calculate it per asset. We take 100% of that asset on us. And then we calculate it for our entire portfolio. Then the alignment part, we look at how is that emission intensity related to the below 2 degrees scenario of the EU, the B2DS EU. And then we look at are we aligned at this moment, and how should the trajectory going forward, how should that look like? In order to establish also a target, of course, 2050, we all know that where we need to be, net zero, but what about the intermediate targets? We have looked at local governmental plans. So for example, for the Netherlands, we have looked at the Klimaatakkoord, which is clearly laying out the pathway of the Dutch government on CO2 emissions, specifically also for the built environment. And based on that, we came to the conclusion that we are able to land at a certain point in 2030. We feel, as a bank, we cannot move a whole lot faster than the governments would be acting. Otherwise, we would probably penalize some homeowners who might already be in trouble in paying the bills for their energy or even finding a property in itself. As you know, in entire Europe, there's quite some difficulty in finding an affordable house. And actually what you see is that there's already a gap between governmental plans and where we need to be if we want to align with the Paris Agreement goals. You can read that in our climate report as well. Meaning that if we want to close that gap, the governmental plans, the regulations to energy efficiency in houses need to be speeded up in order for us to now say in MPS is required and for banks to align with that. I think that should first be tackled before we can ask banks to align with the MPS and the standards that need to come with it. Of course, the disclosure of an MPS can be made a requirement. I think that is just, normal business standards. But in order to also say you need to align with the climate scenarios out there, then governmental regulation also needs to be speeded up. And of course, the data is a huge problem that also needs to be solved ASAP, and preferably not just the energy labels, but also real energy consumption of these assets. Because what we have noted is that there is still a big difference between an energy label as a proxy and the real energy consumption of these assets. And then finally, maybe to close my argument for that more needs to happen than just an MPS to banks, is that the homeowners need to be included here as well. If we don't ask them to act, it's going to be very difficult to achieve anything. And a point that we have made to that also in our report is that we've launched a huge campaign on this topic to create awareness around with our clients. And even if you could get something for free, not a lot of people actually acted on that. So if we don't achieve homeowners to start acting on this, next to banks acting on it, getting more accessibility to data, I don't expect a lot will happen by just putting out an MPS, which is required to all banks. But I do believe it's a very good first step, and that's why we've also started that journey for ourselves. I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. I think a clear set of recommendations. So one, you're missing data. Two, we also need to involve or engage with homeowners. And three, if I understood correctly, you basically said that, disclosing an MPS is fine, but requiring banks to align with it before that happens or becomes a requirement, government should first align their own policies with what's needed to reach the Paris Agreement goals. Yeah. One quick follow-up, which is you're effectively a first mover in this field. Has that posed you, I guess, what are the advantages and disadvantages of that? Have you found yourself in an uncomfortable position at any point? Have you been burned by this and learned from that and have useful advice for others who may wish to follow with an MPS voluntarily so far?
Well, maybe the disadvantage is that you need to really discover everything yourself. So it takes a lot of time before we can actually embark any new country on our journey. What kind of data is out there? What are the scenarios? that's a lot of work. But I mean, other than that, no disadvantages, and maybe the advantage to now know very clearly what is needed in order to really move the needle.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for that.